Hi, I'm Dr. Gemma, and welcome back to Cognitive, the Knitting Psychology podcast. Cheerfully and somewhat irregularly in business since 2008. Segments today may include what's on my hooks, needles, and spindles, a strategy, something I really like, put a lid on it, oh shoot, and blather. So sit back, put your feet up, pick up your knitting, crocheting, spinning, weaving, or dyeing, or any other yarny thing you're doing, and get ready to enjoy. Well, hello and welcome to episode 101 of the Cognitive Podcast. I am your happy-go-lucky host, Dr. Gemma, and it is 9:30 on the evening of Monday, October 24th. We are all back together on the farm. The True Love has an eye exam tomorrow that is going to go swimmingly. He's feeling great. Everything is going well. And it is just a lovely thing. We have had a week of fairly normal on the farm. And boy, talk about perspective. I have an intake tomorrow that should never be seen in this type of therapy, which I'm going to have to tell them. I have another case going nuclear, which I can do nothing about. And in the good old days, that stuff used to bother me. Now I'm at home with my family, flubbing up my ASL class this evening and just laughing it off because, boy, have I been taught a lesson in perspective. So warm thanks to all of you who keep sending your best wishes for the hubs. It's been a pretty amazing year. And we're just pushing our way through now, property tax time and Christmas time and everything else. And we're just making it all work. And as long as we're together, I don't really care. We'll work out any problems. It's just a wonderful thing to reach a point in your life where you sound like that, where things are pretty settled and pretty calm. And all we have to do is keep on keeping on. Thank you also for all the wonderful comments on my Entrelac and Frankensocks projects, and I will swing into them right now. Let me give you the typical COVID reminders that probably everybody gives you. Please get your booster shots, and not just COVID, get your booster shots for everything. It's the fall. So, you should be looking at a flu shot. You might be considering the pneumonia shots. That COVID now is just a normal part of the routine, and making it anything else is kind of silly and short-sighted. Literally over 100 million people have had the COVID vaccine. It is not an experiment. If you think it's an experiment, you need to go back because somebody passed you in your 4th grade science class who should have failed you. So you need to go back to school and apologize to that teacher, or you need to go back and take 4th grade science over again. But after 100 million people have successfully taken a vaccine, I think we have to say it wasn't an experiment. And the numbers have gone down. So this is a good thing. But there is more COVID on the horizon, unfortunately. There's a really virulent strain apparently sweeping Europe. So we're not out of those woods yet. So please get everybody their shots and keep all your records up to date. Because if another wave goes through, we'll be back at masking and giving proof of vaccination. In the meantime, you're probably saying, that's nice, Gemma, but you say that every week, and I do. So you should probably ask instead, what's on my hooks and needles? Well, hooray, hooray. I finished my midsummer socks. I wasn't finishing them. I was trapped endlessly on the instep of sock number 2. Sock number 1 was well and handily finished, and I was stuck in sock number 2, and it just took forever. So you know what I did, right? I started other projects. And then I got so much guilt at almost finishing a Franken sock before I finished sock number 2 of the midsummer socks that I screwed my courage to the sticking point and went charging through the second sock. So I'm wearing them right now. They are beautiful. These are Asylum sock yarns, and I think the color is far and away, but I don't even care. It's in my notes. You can find my notes, by the way, my show notes, at cognitivepodcast.blogspot.com, or you can find it on our group on Ravelry. And as I say this, I reflect on the fact, first, that cognitive is spelled like cog of a wheel, C-O-G, the word knit, K-N-I-T, and then the rest of the word I-V-E. And I also reflect on the fact that in 2008, when I started this podcast, URLs were so new to us as a concept that I used to have to explain it all the time, and it hits me now that I don't, that we're all very savvy about this stuff. So anyway, cognitivepodcast.blogspot.com, that's where the show notes live. Pictures of everything I'm talking about, all the juicy tidbits that you really want, the links, etc. And all the pictures. Did I say the pictures? Okay. So I am finished the Midsummer Socks. In progress, no love for the lane splitter, the skirt. Now I'm really hitting viral stuff and my own knitting traditions right now. And I just love this time of year. It finally has gotten cold here. Cold meaning the 60s. Everybody, in Minnesota have a good laugh. Everybody up in the mountains, everybody in the Northeast, if you're listening, have a good laugh. Scotland, everybody, that's for UTST. Everybody have a good laugh. That I'm calling 60 degrees Fahrenheit cold. But, what can I say? I've been in Southern California for a long time now. But the lane splitter is getting no love because I got so sucked into other things. But I also realize it's about to happen, that I'm pushing my way through various seasonal projects. And suddenly had this experience this morning, an apotheosis, as you will. I woke up and said, I must finish the lane splitter because I must get onto the waistband, I must buy the elastic, and I must wear that thing because it got cool here. In the meantime, that don't know yet, well, hooray, tomorrow is 300 blocks day, which really we're at about 306 or 7. I finally gave up knitting up all my black yarn. I have one partial skein left because I realized I have to sew these together or crochet them together with something. And I just thought I've probably got more than enough black blocks. And I'm looking at a 19 by 18. I'm even considering an 18 by 18 because you can see the picture in the show notes. I got a whole bunch of little clip stitch markers. I mean, seriously, 150 of these things from some Chinese factory for $7.50 on Amazon. Because I just said, I really need to start thinking about this in more practical terms now that I'm getting enough blocks. And so I began to realize that I probably could do an 18 by 18 or an 18 by 19. So what I did was I took my black squares, because I'm finished with that. I know that. I've still got some green, orange, and yellow left, but I'm pretty much done the black. And I said, I know I'm doing a black frame. That is for sure. And so I'm going to have at least 18 blocks in the frame. It may be 19. It may be 19 by 18 or 18 by 18. So I took these clips when they arrived, and using 2 clips for each seam, I took 19 of them and I clipped them together. And you can see the picture in the show notes. I laid them across our queen bed to see what I was getting. Now, I learned a few interesting things by doing this. First, this is crocheting. It stretches with its own weight as it hangs off the bed. So, sure, there's a 19-inch by 5-inch measurement, which, what is 19 by 5? 95 inches? Yeah. So, it should be about 95 inches. And I also looked up what is the typical size of a queen-size bed quilt in the U.S. And I've got my numbers here somewhere. Let me see if I can find them. Okay. The 18 by 19 inches would be 342 blocks. And 18 by 5 is 90. So an 18 by 19 would be 90 inches by 95. And I believe an American queen size, I wrote it down, but I don't see it here, so I'm not sure where I wrote it. But, oh yeah, that's why I lost that. I had a clip on it, and I lost my clip like a ding-a-ling. An American queen is something like, it came out to 18 by 19 when I was figuring it out. So somewhere slightly less than that measurement, than 90 by 95. I think it's like 80 by 95 or something. So I said, okay, so the 18 by 19 is slightly larger than an American queen, and if I put that on the bed, it's pretty much going to stretch. So I took my 19 blocks, I clipped them together, so there is a slight amount of space between each block, and that probably means that probably added a block or two in length. But frankly, at 17 by 17, this would be enough. But anyway, I spread the 19 blocks clipped together, so there are spaces between them slightly, very small, 3 centimeters. But anyway, I clipped that together, and I just laid it across the bed to get a sense of it. And I thought, because it's huge. 19 by 19 is looking pretty big. So I'm thinking, well, the next thing to do is to connect 18 blocks, not 19. 19 is the outer limit I'm going to go to. But to connect, to crochet or sew together 18 blocks and just see how that fits. But I'm pretty impressed. And it really was kind of shocking to clip these together, put it over the bed and go, wow, this is a big blanket. So that is the don't know yet. We are winding that down. I mean, I'm probably at about 306, 307 blocks. And so I forget what 19 by 19 is. 18 by 19 is 342 blocks. So we're getting pretty close on that. It doesn't sound like it to you, but trust me, it is. So that's very exciting. And the picture is very exciting. You can also see the wonderful blanket that I knitted last year. And the temperature blanket is next to it. And I just love the temperature blanket. Although it came out a little less wide than I would like. And I'm always toying with putting a frame on it. Except I just love it. I just love it the way it is. And I always think, well, God forbid, but my son might want it for a twin size or a full size bed, which would fit quite well someday. Or if I'm ever in a twin size bed again, God forbid, but if for some reason. So I keep the temperature blanket the size it is and say, it might be usable for a smaller bed someday. We'll see. But this one, the don't know yet, is looking terrific and certainly looking like it's going to make size. And I've certainly got enough yarn to do 342 blocks. We're really good on that one. What else? Pennsylvania Dutch Embroidery is sitting sadly at my feet saying, love me. The Wrapped in Tiny Chains is another one where I just realized when I said I have to finish the lane splitter, I thought, I've also got to finish the Wrapped in Tiny Chains. That is not that much to go. The secret here, why am I not finishing it? Because it's a very easy pattern. And it just needs to be seamed together, and that's not hard either. I'm not, because I'm getting repetitive stress injuries from the combination of crocheting the blocks for the don't know yet and practicing ASL. And I kind of bombed in class tonight when the teacher was asking me questions because my hands were burning. And my hands were burning. I had a week off. I didn't practice as much ASL as I should have. And my hands were still burning because I was crocheting so much. Well, anyway. It's all okay because we're at week 10 of the class. It's going to end soon. In the meantime, I got some oomph and I said, it's almost Halloween and I always do Frankensocks. Now I don't. I went looking back through my notes and on Ravelry and I said, well, I think I've been doing Frankensocks since 2019, but I didn't realize they were becoming a habit until I think 2020. And so I think I've got the 2020, 21, and 22. I actually called them Frankensocks 2020, Frankensocks 2021. And the Frankensocks, I used to buy Halloween yarn. And I thought that was so cool. And then I began to realize, look, basically it all looks alike. It's going to be orange, black, and white. And sometimes it's kind of a pukey green and black and purple, which I don't really like those colors that much. I like the orange, black, and white. And so the Frankensocks, one day I just said, look at all these scrap yarns. Now at one point, I believe it was Knit Admin was making a scrappy blanket out of sock yarns. And she just wrote around and said, anybody who's got scrap yarn from socks, send them to me. And it was such a cool idea. And that was a very fad thing for a while there, that everybody was making those. And I said, do I want to do that? And I thought for a while I did, and I was saving all my sock scraps. Then I realized that is going to require exactly what she did. I'm going to have to ask other people for extra yarns, and it's going to, for me, it's going to lose its specialness because I want it to be my own scraps so that when I look at a scrap, I remember a pair of socks. I didn't want to borrow from other people. But then I said, well, that's great. So that means I have to send my scrap sock yarn to people making those blankets, or I've got to figure out something to do with it. And so the Frankensocks were born, I don't know if it was 2019 or 2020, but I realized I didn't have any Halloween yarn. I had a lot of brown yarns, a lot of autumnal colors, and I thought, really, I should just take my scraps and make socks. The first pair I made disintegrated. I tried to spit splice the ends of the yarn, and it just didn't work that well. I tried tying the double knots, I forget what those are called, and it just fell apart. But the next pair of socks, I didn't. I just treated them like any knitted ends, and I wove them in at the end of the pattern, and those socks did really well. I think they disintegrated last winter. Those would be the 2020 socks. They just got worn to death. I loved them. They came out really fabulous looking. And so what is a Franken sock, you say? First of all, I was knitting a pair of socks every month for a long time. Now I've backed off that a little bit because I've got so many socks. But I had a lot of scrap yarn. And one of the things that would happen is I would buy yarn and say, that looks great on the skein. And I would make socks and go, okay, I hate those. I just hate those. And so those yarns became the feet of the Franken socks. Any yarn that I don't like that much, I use the leftovers to make the foot. And the rest of the formula goes like this. I do top-down socks, and I do a 2-inch cuff in 1x1 rib. So I pick one color, and I do 2 inches in that same colorway, in 1x1 rib. I don't like to change colors in the middle of the rib. Why? Well, I don't know. I just feel a little superstitious about what if that's not a stable join somehow, and the rib will start getting holes in it. I can't explain why I don't want that to happen in the rib, but I'm okay with it everywhere else. It hasn't happened since that first attempt with this spit splice. This fell apart. I worked out the formula, but at any rate, I do my top 2 inches in the same colorway. After that, I'm assuming that 1 inch is 10 rows. That's not always true, but I don't care. It's close enough. I'm aiming for a 7-inch leg. Okay, so the top 2 inches in the one colorway, in the first colorway, are 1x1 rib. Then I switch to a new colorway and I do stockinette for 10 rows. And that is 1 inch. So I have 2 inches of 1x1 followed by 1 inch of color number 2. And then basically I go down the leg doing 1 inch bands. So doing 10 rows of each color. So 2 inches of color number 1 in 1x1 rib, 20 rows. Then the next few colors, let me see how many that is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, of course, 5. I do 5 different colors. I pick them at random. I stick my hand in the bin and just grab a color. I do say, do I like the way these go together? And I may rearrange them slightly. But anyway, I just do 5 bands. Each is a different color. Each is 10 rows. And each is in stockinette. So by the end of that, I have 7 inches. And then I put in waste yarn for the heel. Just 2 rows to hold the place where the heel's going to be on one side of the sock, just half the stitches. And again, for the waste yarn, I'll just use one of those other colors that I don't like that's lying around. And then I take the color I didn't like and I do the whole foot with it. Okay, so at this point we've got color 1, 2 inches. Then we've got colors 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those are each 1 inch or 10 rows. And then I do the waste yarn for the afterthought heel, and then I go into the colorway I really don't like, that I have a lot of left, to do the foot. So when I finish the foot, I go back, and for the afterthought heel, I do color number 7. That sounds more complex than it is, but you can see this in the show notes. You can see a picture of the finished first Franken sock. I just went like lightning on it, as I always do. Whenever I use striping like this, these things always go fast. Now the other one I do is my Romule, that this has become a new tradition, and I'll come back to it. But again, whenever I'm using my own scrappy stuff and I'm doing stripes, I just can't wait to see how it turns out. So these things take on a life of their own, which is how I got one sock. Usually it takes me a month to do a pair of socks. I think I did the first sock in like 4 days, because I just can't wait. Bonus points on Franken Socks 2022 that I used a lot of self-striping yarns on this. And it's really fun because the foot is in a junk yarn. It's one of Joanne's house yarns, Joanne Fabrics. And, one of the ones you get for on sale for like $2 a skein, and 2 skeins make a pair of socks. And it's really just, it would be pretty if they hadn't stuck a sort of yellow bar in the middle of it. But anyway, it's really hilarious because the ribbing section, the 2 inches, are in a self-striping Christmas yarn that I think is from Rock and String. And then the foot is in this really cheap, grungy, nylon, cheap yarn, and it's all self-striping. And the heel is in a Christmas yarn that I got from some warehouse in Pennsylvania. And it's originally from, I think, Sweden or Germany. Anyway, so this pair is really fun. So I have cast on for the second sock. And you can see the yarns in their primitive state in the picture on the left. There's an extra yarn in there at the top left. You can see a gray-backed yarn with red and black. That actually didn't make it into the sock. But you can see the colors that did. And one of them is missing, the Christmas yarn that I used to make the heel. I had an awful lot of fun with this. Meanwhile, I was roaming through my stash because I want to make a hat out of a bulky yarn, which I'm not going to go into what went wrong there, but I was looking for a second color of my Malabrigo, I think it's Mecha, that I know I have and I can't locate. But while I was looking, I ran into my secret stash of very ancient Noro Corian and some pretty old Noro Silk Garden in worsted weight. And I realized that in the Corian, I've got a lot of coordinating colorways, and I think I've got a good 11 or 12 skeins, and thought, why did I buy those? I had to go in the Wayback Machine. We're talking maybe 2006, 2007. I was looking at the Lady Eleanor wrap, which came out in a book from Interweave Press in 2007. The book is called Scarf Style. I have it on my shelf. It took me a while to find it because I bought the yarn long before I bought Scarf Style. And in the meantime, I had bought Entree to Entrelac, which is another fantastic interweave book. If you've ever wanted to do Entrelac, the 2 things I recommend are Entree to Entrelac, the book. It's sensational. It'll take you through the whole logic of Entrelac, and you knit samples. And I have a few of those babies lying around that need to be finished off into a scarf or made into coasters. But it'll teach you Entrelac. The other thing I recommend for Entrelac is learn to knit and purl backwards. I do not purl backwards. I don't enjoy it enough. But knitting backwards is easy, and it really reduces the pain of doing Entrelac. At any rate, there was this whole stash of beautiful Corian, very old, and I thought, I can't do anything else with this. It's really going to be either a sweater, and the other option is going to be Entrelac. Now, if you know Noro, you know it's born to be Entrelac, that it looks so good as Entrelac, it's hardly worth using it for anything else. I say that feelingly, because back about that time, I did knit a vest in Noro, and it just came out looking like clown vomit. I wore it. Thank God the moths got it. That's all I can say. But here's this big stash. So, I went through and I pulled 11 skeins out of my stash. And you can see a picture of them lying there in my beloved desk chair. And in the background, you will see another great Noro project, and that is the Clapatee shawl, which I've made 3 of those. And that's another thing that Noro is terrific for, those long stripes. So if you've got a big Noro stash, it's going to be a Clapatee or it's going to be a Lady Eleanor. I've just wanted a Lady Eleanor, as you can tell, for like 15 years. So I just started it. I said, the hell with it. I hate having a lot of works in progress. I really do. But I got to tell you, Entrelac is like popcorn. You just can't stop. So you can also see a picture. I've got the first 3 rows of triangles in. I think it's like 35 rows or something. This should take, who knows, the rest of my life. I don't care. I'm putting in a row of triangles a day. I'm probably not going to be able to maintain that pace with work and my class. But boy, oh boy, it's pretty. I'm just loving it. And actually, I'm on my second color of it. These are coordinated. One is basically a slightly darker version of the other. So the lighter one has fuchsia and pink. The darker one has the same background colors of browns and greens, but then has more like burnt orange. Oh, it's going to be just gorgeous. So that's my Lady Eleanor. So as you can see, I have a lot of whips going right now, which is odd for me, but I'm happy. The Franken socks are going to be done really quick. I'm casting on tonight, as I said, and I don't think I'm going to get the ribbing done today, but it's highly likely I'll get it done tomorrow or the next day, and then the stripes will go lickety-split. I've already finished one of them. What fun. I have a few traditions, and I'm going to come back to that. Meanwhile, you can see a list of my favorite resources. I have finally added the Altered Stitch in Valley Village and the Knitting Tree around the Los Angeles airport. I'll try and see if I can put the links in, but they are on the list. But meanwhile, just a plug for the people that I love. Lisa Souza, always wonderful and great prices for an independent dyer, almost unbelievable prices. And my other favorite indie dyer is Dizzy Blonde. For the bigger for the bigger companies, always webs for supplies, and also really good workhorse, solid color, more traditional, more muted sweater colors. They don't have as large a palette as I wish sometimes, but you can't go wrong with a webs yarn. You can't go wrong with Valley Yarns, and they just do. I'm a girl from the Northeast. For a Philly girl, they have a perfect palette. If you're a Northeasterner, you understand Webb's palette. Okay. Meanwhile, the stores I love, as I've said, the Altered Stitch, the Knitting Tree, but also Sierra Cottons and Wools in Bishop, California. And online, I'm fond of Woolen Company. Let's see what else. Not spinning, so that takes us into a strategy. Okay, I'm whizzing through the interpersonal strategies, but I'm probably going to come back and talk about these in slow motion. But I want to give you the second acronym. Last episode, I gave you the first acronym of interpersonal, which is Dear Man. Dear Man is basic. How do I ask for what I want? This acronym is FAST, as fast runner, which I wish I was. But FAST is about how do I weather a storm? How do I talk in a way that is a little more confrontational when I need something? So if I'm talking to somebody and I believe they're not on my side, or I believe they're going to resist, most important, if I believe they might play dirty. That's what FAST is about, F-A-S-T. In short order, F is for play fair, A is for apologize reasonably, S, as in Sam, is stay on topic, stay focused, and T is be truthful. So let me talk about that a little bit. Play fair. Play fair is a complicated idea because a lot of times if we think we're not getting what we want, we start getting strategic and we may get a little shady. We may not realize we're doing it. So one of the important things is if you're going to learn to confront, and those of you who are now saying in your head, oh, well, Dr. Jem, I don't like confronting people. Let me give you a little reality test. Nobody likes confronting people. Let me flash back to the wonderful year, what was that, 1995 or 96, when I was starting my MFT, my Marriage and Family Therapist degree, where the professor got frustrated because we wouldn't confront each other in our group practice and just said, if you're not going to learn to confront, you can't be a therapist. It's really normal, particularly if you're a woman, and I'm going to say too, if you're a white girl, I don't know, seems to me women of color are a lot better at confrontation, and I think we can all probably take a guess why that has to be, because I think they run into it more. I will say, as a middle-class white girl, the damning thing is you're always told to be nice. You're not nice. I cannot tell you how many meetings I have been to and been told, well, you're not very nice. And that's the white way of damning each other. It's like the white middle class, like, damnation girl. You're not supposed to have any guts. So I don't know. I'd be interested in everybody's response to that. But I do know as American middle class woman who's perceived as white, although I actually have a rather mixed race background, I'm always getting how I'm not nice. And that seems to be a white girl curse. I really don't care. If I wanted to be nice, I'd have married some guy and I'd be tied down in his kitchen with no advanced degrees. And by the way, if you married somebody and you are in somebody's kitchen with no advanced degrees, that's not meant as an insult if you did it by choice. But I have to tell you, if you're me, that was never going to work. I always knew when I was a kid that I was not suited to that lifestyle. And, if you went professional as a woman and as an intellectual woman in the 1970s, let me tell you, the niceness curse was applied frequently to you. So I am a little more sour than I should be. So I apologize. I don't mean to insult anybody who chose, a more suburban life than I did. At any rate, That whole nice thing. Oh, God. So, you're sitting here saying, I don't want to do this because I don't want to confront. Nobody wants to confront. But you have to learn to. And let me tell you something else. As you age, get used to it because you're going to get dismissed a lot as you age. That's part of aging. I can't believe how many times I get brushed off now because I have gray in my hair. I understand why women dye their hair now as they age. It's not about beauty. It's about please stop dismissing me. At any rate, I'm whinging, aren't I? Yes, I'm whinging. Well, it's late. So, we are talking about holding your ground in confrontation with the fast skills. So give them a hearing, okay? If you want to quietly go back into your shell and never use them, that's your business. So the first thing is play fair. Be scrupulously fair. Fairness is a reputation that has always served me well. You want people to realize that you are fair. One friend recently called it honorable, and as I consider her highly honorable, I'm so complimented I can't tell you that she applied that to me. But it's really about fairness, that's the kind of reputation that rolls with you. You have to be a straight shooter, you have to be a square dealer, whatever you want to call it. So when you're arguing, even if the other person cheats, you're going to be scrupulously fair. You come in, you don't use cheap personal attacks, you don't go off topic, but that's the rest of this. You're going to try to play fair, even if they don't. Next, apologies. Never apologize inaccurately or knowingly incorrectly. You do need to master the appropriate apology. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, I've done this as an entire segment, How to Apologize, back in the classic series, as I think of it, as of the Cognitive Podcast. Apologizing itself is a huge topic. So I'll try to keep this under control, but the reality is, so you say to somebody, I want you to clean the kitchen tonight. And, the D from your man would tell you, you just describe what you want. I need you to clean the kitchen tonight because I have to go out for work. And the other person, they're not going to want to do it. So you're heading for some confrontation. And they may play dirty. You always ask me to do this with no warning, whatever. Okay. Now, if that is true, you might apologize fairly. I did not realize that. Thank you for pointing it out. Can we talk about that later? Because I really have to get the kitchen clean tonight. We have to come to some solution about this. Okay, that's playing fair. You don't say, hey, you're taking a cheap shot at me. Oh, there you go again, using always and never. You don't do any of that. You got to stay fair. And also, you could say focused for F. You got to stay focused. No, we're talking about cleaning the kitchen. You remember this. And so you just say, okay. Now, if it's reasonable, if you realize you just did this 2 nights ago and you're doing it again, they may have a point, even if they're exaggerating a little bit by saying always. So you can apologize fairly. I'm really sorry because I know I just did this 2 nights ago, but I need you to do the dishes again tonight. That's a fair apology. You're taking responsibility for what you're doing wrong. But you don't lie. Someone says to you, you always do this. And actually, you never do it. You don't go, I know, but this is an emergency. You don't do that. You are now heading into lying and unfairness. We don't do that. Why? Because that's going to come back to bite you in the back. You have to maintain fairness with the people around you. They have to know you as a square shooter. They have to know, I don't know if I should use that phrase, square shooter, anymore. They have to know you as fair, honest, and very plain. Boy, it's really creepy. Square shooter. Ugh. How'd that get into American idiom? Anyway, so you want to get the people around you to realize that you play fair because reputation carries you a lot when you have to confront. Okay, and you also don't want to apologize for something you didn't do. You don't want to apologize insincerely. If somebody says, I hate this, I don't want to do the dishes. Now, you didn't do anything wrong, but you can say, I'm sorry because I know you don't want to. That's true. That's very reasonable. You're commiserating. I'm sorry because I hate doing dishes too. You have not apologized for anything inaccurate there. You're not saying, I'm sorry because I'm unreasonable, which you don't believe or you wouldn't ask. So, in other words, it's okay to apologize reasonably in a way that commiserates, but don't apologize dishonestly or insincerely. The S, stay on topic. If I were to give you one piece of advice about any interpersonal communications, that's the biggest one for me, as you can probably tell. When people play dirty, they try to change the subject, they try to distract you with accusations. You always do this. You always have a reason I have to do the dishes. Now we're off topic. Now we're not talking about doing the dishes tonight. Now we're talking about what you always do or how they always feel. You're off topic. So how do you handle that? As I said with Dear Man, you give a straight up answer. You say, okay, we can discuss that later, but right now we're on the topic of we need the dishes to get done. And when you do that, by the way, you're doing a favor for the other person too, because you're giving them a chance to address the actual concerns. So if you're keeping them on topic, they can say useful things to you like, look, we did this 2 nights ago and I did the dishes. It's your turn, but I'll do them again tonight if you promise to do them tomorrow night. Or I'll do them tonight if you buy dessert at dinner tomorrow night if we go to the restaurant. Something like that. You can cut a deal. So remember, when you're trying to keep everybody on topic, they may perceive it as you're being nasty and you're asking them something they don't want or you're being confrontative. However, you're actually doing them a favor too. Because if they stay on topic, they can actually negotiate. You remember the end of Dear Man. They can actually negotiate with you. So the S, the stay on topic and stay focused, is huge. Finally, the T is truthfulness. Don't lie to get what you want. Don't lie. Don't say, oh, look, I'll do the dishes tomorrow night when you don't mean to do them. Don't do that. Again, you're ruining your own reputation. You'll never be able to cut a deal with this person if you're a liar. I have to say, too, I think the telling place for fast skills, and where I learned them without knowing I was learning them, was back in the days when I did those 8 cognitive fiber retreats, the 8 years of CFR, that we had a really interesting relationship with the then manager of that hotel. And now there were things I did wrong. The bed bug incident is one that springs to mind if Jedi Mom is listening. I got that wrong and I'm still embarrassed about it. But the reality was, I really held ground with them. And they did a little bit of wiggling, the hotel, to get more or get less. And the interesting thing is, by our 3rd year, when they realized I was going to hold my ground and I was going to make reasonable demands, they suddenly changed their demeanor. They began to really work with us, to give us a lot of bonuses, to really help us in a lot of ways. And the interesting thing is, whenever you arrange a function, you really learn fast skills. That was a great training. I used to be a manager for a rowing team at the University of Pennsylvania, and that was my first training in it. And what I learned from that is you can really ask anybody anything. You can make a request for anything once you master this. Once you learn that you're absolutely free to make any crazy request you want, as long as you use fairness, as long as you use fast skills. So those are the confrontative skills, the fast skills. There's a few more things, but basically the core of interpersonal skills are Dear Man and fast. I, of course, still have up the ACT hexagon, and I want that there too because we're doing interpersonal, because the hexagon is relevant. When you are doing interpersonal skills, if you look at that hexagon, you're going to see 2 of them stand out. One point of the hexagon, stay in the present. That's being focused, that's being on topic, that's being fair. And the other is values, that you are using your values. And you're teaching the person you're confronting that your values are reliable. Okay? You could argue too, when you're being truthful, that's acceptance. You don't avoid painful topics, you just talk to the other person honestly. And of course, you're doing committed action. You've made a plan and you're carrying through, even if you have to be confrontative. So there we go. Let's roll on here. On to the fluffy books. I'm still in the Beatrice Hyde Clare series by Lynn Messina. I think I'm on, what's it called, Nefarious Engagement? They have crazy names. They're a lot of fun. I think I'm on the 4th book. I think she's got 8 of them, which surprises me. I would have thought the series would die after the predictable romance occurs. But it's a lot of fun. And again, you can't take this seriously. I don't think there's a huge redeeming social value here in any way. It's really just pasting 21st century values onto a Regency couple, and it's a blast. I started listening to The Sign for Home. I cannot remember the author. It was a New York Times bestseller. It was recommended to me by a deaf client, which surprises me. It's written by a hearing author. And it's about the experience of an interpreter working with a deafblind patient. And the interpreter is gay. The deafblind patient is a Jehovah's Witness. You can tell there's going to be some interesting difference of ideas there. I'm enjoying it. It's kind of predictable in terms of, gay romance, which is where I think it's going. It's a pretty formulaic novel, but it's a lot of fun. It's interesting. I guess I'm a little bit queasy because this is a hearing guy writing as a deaf guy for half of the book. And he generously thanks all the people in the deaf community who helped him. I don't think he's an interpreter by trade. I think he's just an author. Like being an author is easy. So it's interesting. I'm always a little uneasy when someone is writing about a culture that is not their own. And that's a very dicey question because we all know how cultures have been seriously misrepresented in lit, particularly by imperialist conquering cultures. So we all know that problem is out there. And I think one of the solutions in current lit or current fiction has been to write about the supernatural instead. Instead of trying to say, I'm a white person talking about a person of a different culture than mainstream white culture, I'm going to talk about vampires. I think that's one way we're trying to deal with it, that we just are trying not to. And there's always the stress of, yes, but imagination is part of the writing game. It's part of the fun for the author. But doing it respectfully is challenging. And you do have to talk to people and research it and have people reading your stuff as you go. At any rate, it's good, and it comes highly recommended by the deaf community. So I've been enjoying it. I'm waiting to get another one called Deaf Again by a person who got their hearing then lost their hearing. And I feel a little better about that. That one seems to be lost in the mail right now. At any rate, I'm listening to The Sign for Home. And it's just kind of corny, like a romance novel should be. It's kind of fun to read it from a gay perspective. I haven't read a lot of gay lit, and so I'm rather enjoying it. Because it's like, wow, humans are just humans. Anyway, something I really like, voting. Did I mention I like voting? Did I mention it's time to vote? Did I mention you can vote early, including in California? Mail-in ballots. Those are one of the great gifts of democracy in my home state. And I would just say, go research it carefully. I am just going to point out, okay, I am unhappy because we have an extremely conservative representative from my region in the House. He's a pig. He just is. And he's Republican. All his signs are blue. Yeah, that's right. He is faking with his signs. He's faking being a Democrat. I mean, seriously, guys, that's scum. No, we don't have any kind of patent on colors, but I really kind of resent, because he's just misrepresenting. That, look, we talk about red states and blue states. If you're painting your signs blue, you're trying to pass as a Democrat. That's embarrassing when you're that dishonest. Oh, my God. Vote. Know your issues. Vote. Meanwhile, the other thing I really like are my own personal knitting traditions. This week, I was really bogging down in the summer of small projects and not finishing anything. And I was revived by the knitting tradition of the Franken socks. So I wanted to talk briefly. My knitting traditions right now, I think there's sort of 3 going on big time. Well, now I have a few more. First of all, I'm going through the year. I have vestuary. I love making a vest in February. I have to tell you, that has paid off hugely. Because this year it just turned cold, and I went to my knitting bins, which are Tupperware bins, big, like 20-gallon bins, filled with my own sweaters. This is the first year I popped the bins open. Now, I did see 2 beautiful sweaters that Jasmine Knitmore gave me. I don't want to downplay those. But this is the first time in my knitting life I popped the bins open, and I had a full collection of sweaters I made for myself. And they're beautiful. I was stunned at how good these sweaters are. Now, that comes out of a few things. There are a lot of us who like to do new and challenging patterns, but not me. I went the other direction. I said, I want to master a few basic patterns. One was the vest, and I used the bottom-up vest from Ann Budd's book, The Knitter's Handy Book of Patterns, which I can't recommend enough. I just think that's one of those books that everybody should have on their knitting bookshelf. And I love that vest. And it's very simple, and I've made my own amendments to it, and every time I post one of them, she puts likes on it. Bless you, Ann Budd. Bless you for following my use of your wonderful pattern. So I have made a lot of these, actually. I'm trying to think how many. I made at least 4, then I get 5. And, that's the idea, is I've made them and made them and made them. My early ones were Harry Potter themed, and they don't fit all that well, but it was also a lot heavier when I made them. And so probably I'm thinking I will pass them on to the Goodwill and make myself some others. But every time I make one of these classic patterns, I tailor it just a little bit more. It gets just a little better. My last 2, I really hit my pattern with my emendations to fit me. They're both in Malabrigo, and they're sensational. One is in pines in this beautiful green semi-solid, but it's almost a solid. And the other was in Cielo y Tierra, or Tierra y Cielo, brown and blue. And it looks sort of gray or dark steely gray from a distance. But, these 2 go with everything. They're just special. And then I have the 2 Harry Potters, and I think I made Twin Face a vest. I feel like I made, the vest that got eaten by moths, the Hideous Nora vest. That was probably the same pattern. So, I had a bunch of those. And then I had a bunch of bricks, and I love my bricks. Oh my gosh, the bricks in Wales Road, oh my God, it fits me like a glove. It looks terrific. It's perfectly comfortable. Oh, I'm so happy with those. So that was a beautiful thing. And so vestuary is kind of the kickoff. In February, I do a vest. Will I do a vest this February? Yeah, that brick yarn sitting around, the red that was going to be for Twin Face, that's looking mighty vestuary to me. Okay, so that's how I start. And then, I just sort of meander through the summer doing stuff. And I like to do socks. I really believe you got to have a pair of socks going because you can carry them anywhere. So I always have socks in a sock knitting bag in my larger carrier bag that I use as a purse. I no longer use purses. I just use Trader Joe's carrier bags. It's so awful. I look so scummy. But I do. And I always have socks. I always have a small bag that has a sock project. Okay, so moving through the year, the next thing I do is probably in October, I do the Franken socks. And the Franken socks are all my sock leftovers. No, it's not all of them by any means. But because I've been knitting socks for so long, I think I've got like 93 pairs now on Ravelry, and very few of them are in existence. I mean, I don't think I have more than 15 or 20 pairs, in existence right now. But, I have leftovers from those. And so those become the Franken socks. And as I said, the Franken socks I think of in 1-inch increments down the leg, 10 rows for each inch. But the ribbing I tend to do in the same color. I don't tend to switch colors in the ribbing, so that's 2 inches. And so, it's 7 inches of 1-inch stripes, 5 inches really, in stockinette with a 2-inch 1x1 rib on top. And then an afterthought heel in yet another color, and the foot in one of my least liked colors, so that it's in my shoe and I don't really see as much of it. I want people to see the really cool stripes. So those are the Franken socks. I was toying with, the last 2 years I've done an autumnal color for Thanksgiving, but that's very unsatisfying because I tend to get bogged down in Christmas knitting. So I don't think I'm going to make that a tradition. But I do like to do a pair of Christmas socks, I have to admit. I like having Christmas-themed socks. I don't know if I've got yarn for that this year. I think I might have an old skein of, Forbidden Fibers lying around somewhere, but I think that's my last one. I had stockpiled a whole bunch of Christmas socks, and I've used them. So that seems to be the other tradition. Round about then, I start getting into sweater knitting, which I don't care that much about because I've got now, my project sweater chest is very complete. I've got a very nice collection of sweaters. However, I'm starting to want to do yoked sweaters, so we'll see how that goes. I've got one queued up that I've divided it and wound the yarn and everything. We'll see how that goes, and I'll come back to it. However, the thing I have discovered is scrap sweaters. And so I've got now 3 sweaters, and they all fall in one category. I discovered the concept of romule, I think last year. Romule is the Norwegian word for the time between Christmas and New Year's, where people just take time off and kick back. Now, here in the States, we don't get that anymore. When I was younger, we used to get that time off in most of my jobs. We don't anymore. You have to actually sacrifice some of your vacation time, which I'm happy to do. But this year, I have decided that I am now a celebrator of romule. Last year for romule, I had all these extra skeins. When a friend of mine, when her knitting store went out of business in Bakersfield years ago, when she had her closing sale, I went in and just bought up individual colors, individual skeins of worsted weight, and said, sooner or later I'll do something with these. And I bought them in greens and blues. And they'd been sitting in there easily since like 2008. No, about 2010. And I just got tired. They were taking up like a whole bin. And so I went through and I used them. And I have a lot of them still left over in the greens and blues. But that was the first romule sweater that you may remember. I didn't do it in the brick pattern, which I live to regret. But I did it in a perfectly good top-down pattern. And I had a lot of fun experimenting with it. And so as I knitted, things began to happen. Like when I got into the yoke, I used a really light color around the neckband of the yoke. Below the neckband of the yoke. And began to experiment with just little Fair Isle motifs. I just took scraps of other things like pink and brighter blues and greens and just did little Fair Isle rows. 1 row, 2 row motifs. I had a blast with that. It looks very good. And I also, because of the pattern I was using, I was a little experimental with the stripes. Like I did a narrow stripe. I did the first color, then I did a 2-row stripe of the second color, 2 rows of the first color, and then went into the second color. And it came out as a very handsome sweater. My first romule. Also, I used a lot of my hand spun that was in similar colors. And, getting your hand spun stash into a scrap sweater is a really cool thing. I love using my hand spun anyway. So that was really good. That led to the second romule. Now, romule is but once a year, but that didn't stop me. The second romule sweater was I just went through all my hand spun and I realized, my golly, I've got a lot of pinks and purples. And so I did a total hand spun. This blew my mind. This was not my first hand spun sweater, I might add. But this one, I think I called it the feral Easter egg. So, romule in the spring. But I have to tell you, that was one of the great knitting experiences of my knitting career so far. Just entirely relying on my own hand spun, mixing colors, experimenting, learning how to stripe evenly across the sleeves. And I got to tell you, I think the feral Easter egg is definitely couture. It is not your standard sweater. It is sensationally handsome. It's a bit heavy because it's got silk blended in all of it. The other thing is, where did all this come from? The romule and the feral Easter egg came from the Mad Skills Mammoth sweater. And that was I started working on it. I looked at all my hand spun. I spun all summer, last summer in 2021. Spun all summer because I wanted to get through a whole bin of spinning yarn, which I did, spinning fiber. And that was great. But funnily enough, all the colors coordinated. I had this beautiful cranberry red yak silk combination. And then I had a silk merino of just natural gray, just the sheep's wool blended with silk. And then I had an alpaca blend with a silk variant that I'd plied together, a variegated silk. Oh my God, that was the Mad Skills Mammoth sweater, because that was the first time I did an entirely hand-spun sweater, my own work. And I was just, literally, I spun them in the summer and then just knitted them all fall. And by the time I escaped to Mammoth, just about a year ago, right now, in fact, this week, I actually finished the last cuff of the sweater in Mammoth and wore it for the first time on my first day in Mammoth. And it's very heavy. It's very bulky because of the silk weight in it. It's also very warm, and it's a sensational sweater. So what I'm really saying is I seem to have developed this scrap sweater tradition, or a mix and match. I don't know if I would call my hand-spun scraps. But anyway, that's become the romule tradition, and I did actually take at least 4 days off this year between Christmas and New Year's, and I will be observing romule and knitting a sweater during that time, and I am collecting all my scraps. So I think that's my knitting tradition so far. I don't feel a need to knit more solid color sweaters, although I certainly have the yarn to do it. The final knitting tradition is I'm using my stash. There's been a lot of discussion over the years between the Knitmores and myself on our podcast and with each other in person about, stash diving versus buying new yarn and having too much stash and blah, 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 and how many, whips you should have and all of that. I don't think any of it really matters. I think it's important to knit what you love and to be happy as you knit. And if that involves using a lot of scraps or never using scraps, if that involves having a lot of whips or having no whips, I am happier with fewer whips. I start feeling like things are too out of control when I have too many. But I do understand startitis. So those of you who like to have 40 or 50 whips, more power to you. It's just not my style. I don't think you can really claim there's an advantage to either. I think it's really about whether you're a progress or a process knitter and really what you're comfortable with. But what I'm doing right now is I am surrounded by yarn and I'm uncomfortable with the amount, so I am working through stash. And so every time I do a sweater or a big project like the Lady Eleanor stole, I'm really, really happy because, Lady Eleanor's taken, I think, 11 skeins. And every time I do a sweater, that's somewhere between 10 and 8 skeins, depending on how big the skeins are and how big the sweater is. So I'm having a blast doing that. It's taught me, though, my next project, if I get through the ones I have queued up, it's probably going to be a sock yarn sweater because I have way too much sock yarn, if that's a possibility. And I don't have the fiber retreat anymore. I used to trade off or give a lot of my sock yarns as gifts, and that's how I kept my stash under control. So there we are. Something I really like, my knitting traditions. Because I've spent a lot of time on that, I'm going to tell you that I have nothing to say and put a lid on it, and that takes me down to the blather. I don't think I have too much going there. ASL, we're on week 10. My midterm went well. I'm starting to dream in ASL, and I'm always struggling with the urge to quit the class, and yet I feel sometimes I'm doing very well in it. It certainly has been a good education in ASL and in the technology that universities and colleges now use, which is new to me. So that's been fun. But it's weird that I dream in ASL now. That's definitely a weird experience. Am I being accurate in my dreams? I have no idea. The pup date, Queenie's gone rogue. She's 5 months now, right? Yeah. Well, she'll be 6 months in November, on November 10th. She suddenly realized I'm asking her to obey me, and so now she won't. And so it's been very funny. We're having those collie standoffs. I'm holding her food dish, and I say, sit. She does everything else. She jumps on me. And Captain kind of goes with her. Captain will regress. Captain's pretty obedient without Queenie around, but with Queenie around, Captain gets regressive. They're now big, so I finally need them. I mean, they jumped up against me, and I just lifted a knee into their chest as they rose, and so that's helped with that. You don't hurt them. You don't knee them hard. But if you've got a big dog jumping up on you, there's a point where you just raise your knee. You have to teach them this is a bad idea. You don't kick them. You don't hurt them. You don't push out. You just raise your knee into them so they hit your knee as they rise off the ground. And it doesn't hurt them, but it surprises them. And so we're doing that, but we're doing well. And, it's very funny because every puppy goes through this. And Queenie is smart, which is saying something because Captain is smart. I figured Captain was going to set the record among my dogs, but Queenie, she's sharp. So, what you do in a situation like that is you simply remember, as you do with small children, you have all the goodies. So they know the behavior, and you can let them problem solve for the behavior. So I stand there till Queenie realizes this is not a joke. The food is not going to hit the ground until she sits. So we're working on that. Meanwhile, I was kind of ill last week, very sore throat, and I really do think it was my allergies because of, the month of trying to feed everybody meant that I had to handle a lot of hay, and I am allergic to it and to the dust on it. And it kicked up my allergies, so I had a very painful throat last week. And so I did finally take a COVID test, and I'm happy to say it was negative, but I'm glad to have those tests around. The calendar, Stitches SoCal, we are on. I will be there at least Sunday the 13th. Jen, if you are within the sound of my voice, either one of you, I'm hoping we're going to meet for lunch, right? Anybody else who wants to meet up, I will have a hotel room at the convention center in the Sheraton. And so I'm really happy to just have a sit-down knitting session in my room. I don't really want to spend too much time on the show floor. Well, COVID risk. I am on for the Grand Canyon with my family June 5th through 9th. And hopefully I'm on for Sunnybank. We will see how that works out next August. In the meantime, Minerva gets the last word. It is, I'll be watching you, and there's a lovely picture of her watching something on the floor there. Actually, she looks like she's reading my California ballot. But Minerva now is going through a phase of getting used to having the boys back. And so she is settling in. And every time my husband walks in the room or my son walks in the room, Minerva gets between us just to remind them that she is watching all of us and that I belong to her. Now that she has to share the food giver with the two males who have returned home, she is being very careful to point out that she is watching my every move and she is still my owner. So here from the home of the cat slave, I just want to hope everybody is feeling good as we head into Halloween. It's been great talking to you. Don't forget the usual safety stuff. Remember, wash your hands, socially distance, wear your mask in a crowd, update your vaccines. The really important thing I'm telling you is we are communal. We are not individuals. If we're going to get through any hard times, we want to bring everybody through it together. We don't want to just throw people overboard if we think our ship is sinking. We are a community. All right, so remember that the whole point here is everybody stay safe, take care of each other, and that's the best way to take care of yourself. And I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye. So we have come to the end of another episode of Cognitive. Please do not use this podcast to diagnose yourself. If you think you are having a mental health problem, please contact a licensed mental health professional. Show notes for these episodes can be found at cognitivepodcast, all one word, .blogspot.com. Episodes can be found at iTunes under the name Cognitive Podcast, but also can be found posted next to the show notes on the Blogspot page. Thank you so much for listening. Everybody stay safe, take care of each other, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.